The movie begins in a small town in South Korea. This town depends on the Hanbyul nuclear power plant for energy and jobs. The plant has been there for many years, and most of the people who live in the town either work there or rely on it in some way. We are introduced to Jae-hyeok, a young man who works at the plant. He lives with his mother, his widowed sister-in-law, Young-hee, and his nephew, Min-jae. Jae-hyuk's father and brother both died in accidents at the same plant, which makes him dislike his job. He wants to leave the town and work on a fishing boat to earn money for his family, but his family and friends discourage him from leaving. Factory workers are worried about the safety of their factory. Pyong-seok, one of the senior operators, is especially concerned. He and some of the workers try to warn the government about the problems. They tell the president of South Korea, Seok Ko-hang, that the plant's safety inspections were rushed when it was built. However, their concerns are ignored, and the prime minister insists that everything is fine. One day, an earthquake hits the town. The ground shakes, and the nuclear reactor at the plant begins to overheat. The workers try to fix the situation, but the plant's safety systems are old and fail to work properly. They cannot cool down the reactor. Meanwhile, the government starts discussing what to do. They argue over whether they should release radioactive gas into the air to reduce pressure or evacuate the people living near the plant. The evacuation begins, but the streets become crowded with cars and people cannot leave quickly. While this is happening, the reactor building explodes. Many workers are killed or injured in the explosion, and Jae-hyeok is exposed to radiation. The situation becomes even more dangerous as the reactor continues to overheat. The government sets up an evacuation center nearby, but the evacuation is poorly planned. The people in the center are quarantined, and officials block communication to prevent panic. Yeon-ju, Jae-hyok's fiancée, finds evidence that the reactor has exploded. She shares this information with the evacuees, and they realize that they are not safe in the center. Together, they break out and use buses to escape. At the nuclear plant, firefighters are working hard to stop the situation from getting worse. But because of the radiation, many of them start to get sick. The president finally takes control of the situation and orders the firefighters to use seawater to cool the reactor. However, the damage is severe, and they discover that the spent fuel rods in the storage tank are losing coolant. If the coolant completely drains, the situation will become much worse, as radioactive material could spread further. The president appears on television and addresses the nation. He explains how serious the situation is and asks for help from the plant workers. The mission is dangerous, but it is the only way to prevent a larger disaster. Jae-hyeok is still angry at the government for their lack of preparation and poor handling of the plant's safety. However, after hearing the president's plea and thinking about the people in his town, he decides to help. Jae-hyeok and his friend Gil Seop, along with other workers, volunteer to return to the plant. They know the risks, but they also know that someone needs to seal the cracks in the tank and stop the coolant from escaping. Jae-hyeok calls Yeon-ju to say goodbye before getting on the bus with the other workers. The team heads back to the plant, knowing that some of them may not survive. Once inside the plant, the team works to seal the cracks in the tank. However, the damage is worse than they expected, and the cracks continue to grow. The group realizes that they need to come up with a new plan. Jae-hyeok suggests using explosives to create a new tank in the basement, which will allow the spent fuel rods to drop safely into the water below. To carry out the plan, someone needs to stay behind, operate the explosives, and seal the door to the waste room. Jae-hyeok, already sick from radiation poisoning, volunteers for the task. He knows that he will not survive this mission, but he is determined to save the town. Jae-hyeok begins preparing the explosives, while the rest of the team seals the cracks and retreats. He uses his helmet-mounted camera to broadcast a farewell to his family and Yeon-ju. In his message, he thanks them for their love and support and asks them to live well without him. Once the others are safely out of the plant, Jae-hyeok completes the final steps of the operation. As the explosives detonate, the spent fuel rods drop into the basement's water tank, successfully preventing further radioactive leakage. The explosion also destroys the waste room, and Jae-hyeok is killed in the process. His sacrifice ensures that the disaster does not escalate further, saving countless lives in the town and beyond. The operation is a success, and the reactor is finally stabilized. The residents mourn the loss of Jae-hyeok and the other workers who did not survive. The town begins to rebuild, but the tragedy leaves a lasting mark on everyone.